On this episode of Sega Talk, we fire 100 missiles, or is that 400, into the air and see where they land as we talk about treasures. Bangai-O, what classic game inspired this 2D shoot-'em-up? How does it compare to the N64 original? Find out on Sega Talk. Me, me, me. Sega Bits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello and welcome to episode 116 of the Sega Talk podcast. I'm Barry. With me is my co-host, George.
Hello, everyone. See, simple.
Hello. Very simple. And on this episode, we are going to be talking about Bangai-O. So what is Bangai-O? Well, it is known in Japan as, and let's try not to butcher this, Bakuretsu Muteki Bangai-O, which translates to explosive, invincible Bangai-O.
They should have kept that title. You think so? Like a longer one?
Bakuretsu Muteki Bangai-O. It is a shoot-'em-up video game developed by Treasure for Japanese N64 consoles in September 1999. And if you're thinking, like, I thought this was Sega Talk, well, the game only had a limited run in Japan with only 10,000 copies produced, which apparently was like a thing for early Treasure releases. I never was aware of that. Like, they're really like they were limited run games before limited run games, basically.
Right.
But think of that, like only 10,000 Bangai-O Japanese cartridges exist. Those must be rare.
Very rare.
However, with assistance from Conspiracy Entertainment, it was brought to the Sega Dreamcast only 3 months later on December 1999 in Japan. And the game eventually released worldwide with a U.S. release on March 22nd, 2001. The European version actually released a little bit before that on October 20th, 2000, and that was published by Swing Entertainment. And
what was it again? What were they called?
Swing Entertainment.
Okay, just
and then
make sure.
It was distributed by Virgin Interactive. You know, before I go on, as a kid, I never knew what that meant, but now I'm like, it's kind of wild that this company's called Virgin, you know, and it's like
right.
Virgin Games, Virgin Airlines. Like, is it a joke? I don't know.
Or is it like trying to invoke, like, I don't know, some other creepy vibes of a dude stalking the, I don't know, like, it's either the nerdy guy that's never got laid or a young woman, which is even worse, probably.
It's like
they're both
if you
weird.
did like, yeah, it's like if you did Incel Interactive or something.
Right. Yeah.
Or, well, I guess Intel Pentium processor. Intel's pretty close to Incel. Anyway, the game's working title was Muteki Robo 893, and then in parentheses, Yakuza. So technically, I guess it would be a Yakuza game. This episode was actually a Patreon pick. George, do you want to tell the fine people about patreon.com/SagerBits?
If you guys want to support us and everything we do, like these videos talking about obscure Sega games and maybe even sometimes Nintendo 64 original games that became Sega games, you can support us at patreon.com/SegaBits. We have different tiers. $1 gives you the audio version early. $5 gives you the video version early. Every tier lets you tell us your memories about the games. And if you pay $20 and over, you get to tell us what we talk about. So check it out. Thank you for your support.
And this episode was actually a Patreon pick. It comes from Michael S. And because he's the picker, we get to read his memories at the top of the show. So he told us, I picked this game up as soon after the Dreamcast was discontinued, when most of the games hit bargain bins or went on sale, it seemed. I didn't have money to buy a different console, so the Dreamcast is by far the most played and remembered console. I really liked how much and how fast you could destroy things in this game. Seeing so many bullets fly around and all the different enemies was great. It's also easy to pick up and play for a few minutes, and the levels were short, and there was an anime-like story. So, George, share your memories of Bangai-O, and do you own this hidden gem, this classic?
I do not own it, and I actually have not even beat the game. It's actually one of the rare treasure titles that I haven't played all the way through. My only history with it is that it had no marketing when it came out. I don't even think it had an ad or even a big article on this official Sega Dreamcast magazine. The only reason I remember it is because I remember it vividly going to like one of those swap meets, and I saw it used for like literally next to nothing, and I'm almost 100% sure this game is super rare. And at the time, I didn't know this was actually a treasure game back in the day. I don't know if they advertised it on the cover or anything, so I didn't even know. And I saw the back of the box, and I was like, oh, it's 2D. I could buy bigger 3D games like Code Veronica or something else used. So I skipped on it, which is probably a bad thing because I'm assuming this is a rare game.
Yeah, so my experience with this, as you mentioned, there weren't really any ads. I couldn't find any good print ads. I couldn't find any commercials. And in fact, I remember reading about this game in the official Dreamcast magazine, but they did not give it like a big feature. And I think what stuck out to me is all the tiny little sprites, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But I actually did not own this game until 2010. And I know that because I actually still have the eBay email win. So check this out. I got Bangai-O in a lot, like a collection of games. So I received Tech Romancer, which I believe was complete. Record of Lotus War, which I believe was complete. A disc-only Sonic Adventure, and then a disc-only Bangai-O for a cool $35.
Oh my god,
no, $35.
Dude. You're just this is the problem. This is the problem. You know when you get on the Facebook page, right? And then there's those people that like have those big collections, and they like went into debt just to show off. You're the opposite.
Right.
See, you get mad when you see them, right? But you're the opposite. You're the guy that goes in there and you're like, oh yeah, I bought all these for $35 back in the day, and they get mad at you.
So I have, and I've done collection picks. In fact, I'll do a collection video probably in the next week or two because I got to catalog what I own. But yeah, if you look at my collection, it's not massive. It's like one wall of Sega games. Like if I put my arms out, I could hold all my Master System and Genesis games, like that. But it's like I bought this stuff when it was cheap, and I never was trying to get a complete Dreamcast collection, but I have, I think, 3/4 of the American collection. So, in any case, let's do a little quiz time.
Uh-oh.
So, George, how much do you think a complete U.S. copy of Bangai-O sells for on eBay?
$256.95. Is that precise enough?
We'll go with Price is Right rules. Right. So you went over. So it was $175 for complete.
Worth every penny.
Well, I don't know about that, but like disc. I'm happy with my disc only. I think disc only sells for like $100.
Okay, how many times do you go to Starbucks a day?
I don't go to Starbucks every day. I never understand that people go, oh, it's less than the price of coffee a day. I'm like, you make coffee at home, dipshit.
Right.
Like, why are you buying
100%?
Oh, and they always bump it up. Like over the years, they're like, oh, it's like $1 a day. It's the price of a cup of coffee. Now they go, it's $10 a day. That's like the price of a cup of coffee. I'm like, who's spending $70 a week on coffee?
Teenagers.
Yep.
And like
Maybe.
Old people think anyone that's like less than 10 years old, less than them, are just basically teenagers, even though they're like 30.
Yeah. But anyway, back to Bangai-O. My thing is, like, I think I understand the collectability of games. Like 175 is, I think, too much for this. But let's say you're a huge Treasure fan. You like to have the complete package. You like to have the manual. Like, I get it. For me, having the disc only, that's about the equivalent of having a burned disc. Like, it's just not too special for me. I like opening it up, reading the manual. If you remember on our Samba de Amigo episode, that was the only way I was able to read the story because no one scanned the Wii manual, which is so funny because the Wii version of Samba de Amigo is like a $5 game.
Right.
But no one scanned it. But, you know, there's something really fun, not from a collector's standpoint, but more from like just experiencing the manual and the disc or the cartridge. There's something fun there, but it's not worth $175 in my opinion. Now, this is going to be a really weird episode of Sega Talk, and I say that because I'm going to read the story, and it's going to be done like that. So, Bangai-O follows the story of Riki and his sister Mamie, or Mamie, as they pilot Bangai-O against Guy and his Cosmo gang, punishing them for the nefarious crime of fruit contraband. And that is the entire plot to the game. Games like Fantasy Zone from the 1980s have walls of text, like scrolls of story. And here's Bangai-O come out of the gate in 1999 being like, a brother and a sister are fighting space pirates for fruit.
I think sometimes less is more, right?
But that's not even less. That's like nothing. That's like a fortune cookie.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I think this game is like a minimalist game. I don't know if that would be the right term. Like, if you look at the graphics, it felt like Treasure was literally like, how much money do we have to develop our next game? And they're like, $10. And then they're like, all right, I got an idea. And this is the idea. Because, like, this came out on Dreamcast, and it looks like a Game Boy Advance game in a way. The graphics, how the pixels look.
Oh, absolutely. And then, but what I thought was so weird about it, and I said this was a weird episode, is because that story is so short, and yet this game has over 40 stages. So many stages that I will never do a stage-by-stage breakdown like we sometimes do, because that would get so tedious. Right. So it's almost like there's a plot that I just already covered, and then there's a stage selection that's so big it's not worth covering. So it's like it's a long game with very, very light on content. So yeah, I would say it's minimalist in that regard. I mean, yeah. But there is something interesting to be said. So the English intro text to the game is completely different between the European and US versions, despite the game itself, as I mentioned, having a very thin plot. And thanks to the website The Cutting Room Floor, we can actually take a look at these two scripts side by side. And they note that the English intro text being different, the European version is actually closer to the Japanese one, whereas the US version was rewritten to incorporate plot details that only appeared in the manual. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is pretty interesting, I think.
So there's actually, the US version has more story, technically.
Right. So what do you think about that? Like, the idea that, like, let's say when they did Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and let's say Japan got it, and then during the time that it came to America, we got new, I guess, Knuckles lore, and now all of a sudden he has grapes in his hand, or he's like, you know, I don't know what they would add, right? Whatever they added in some coloring book, right? Would that be okay?
I honestly think the classic Sonic games really would have benefited in the English releases to include the text within the game. You know, nothing crazy, but just be like a little, like Streets of Rage had just like a little intro over some skies. Like, I don't know. I actually really like the idea of doing away with the manual entirely when it comes to plot. I think it's always an annoyance to me when it's like there's a really cool story, but it's all in the manual.
Right. And kids these days, they play them on the ROMs, right?
Well, yeah. Well, kids these days, they don't have manuals. The manual is in the options screen, and it turns out to be a QR code to a website.
Right.
So, crazy. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to give some examples here. So the first line of dialogue in the European version for for the scrolling like intro text. It says, way off in the distant future at the edge of the universe on the Dan Star lives a hot-blooded young man. Meanwhile, the US version says, in the distant future at the edge of the universe lies the planet Dan Star. Here, Ricky Makishi works for the People's Police. Like it makes sense. It's readable. I think the European one sounds like kind of like directly translated English.
They use Google Translate.
Yeah, it reminds me of the modern Yakuza games where they rewrite it from scratch to make it have more character and like make a little more sense. Right. Like for example, okay, so European one says, "Ouch, you damned bandits. Next time we meet, things won't be so simple. Father, I'm back. Oh, hello, Father." And then, meanwhile, it says for the American one, "Ouch, damn space bandits. Next time we meet, you won't get away so easy. Hey, Father, I'm home. Oh, no, Father." So clearly, if you find your father hurt, you don't go, "Oh, hello, Father." You go, "Oh, no, Father."
Can you imagine? Your whole family, like, just like, oh, hello, family. It's like, dude, what? You just got attacked by space pirates.
Right. And what's so funny, and I won't read the whole thing. I don't know if you're showing it on the screen, but
I am.
It says here, like, when they see their father hurt, tell me, what does this mean? Or what does that mean? Like, who would say, imagine finding your mom on the floor, you come home and you go, what does that mean?
Right.
Whereas in the American one, they go, "Father, are you okay? What happened here? Where's Mammy?" Or Mamie. Mammy is problematic. So, yeah, just overall, it reads a lot more naturally. It makes total sense. So, yeah, score 1 for the Americans because, yeah, it's not on the level of, like, turn off every zig, like meme material. But, it's like the father calls the bad guys obnoxious. Like, space bandits broke into our house, attacked father, smashed his computer. And in Europe it goes, obnoxious men have suddenly father.
So this is kind of like a trend with the treasure games. Remember we talked about Dynamite Heady, and they were talking about how the American had no text, while the Japanese one had a whole story.
Yeah, it's interesting. And level names were changed too to make a little more sense. And if you're still sharing, if you scroll down, it shows they actually edited the continue screen between the Japanese and American ones, because your continue screen basically shows a naked little boy, the main character, following what is essentially the little girl dressed as what looks like a Ku Klux Klansman.
Right.
And they changed that to the little boy wearing his underwear, and the little girl's replaced with like a alien driving a robot.
He also has a big piece of ham, or like a bone.
Yeah. He's it looks like it's a piece of ham on a like javelin. You see that? So what they did was they physically just took a large asset and laid it over the original art.
Right.
And then turned the candle into ham. So weird stuff.
And then that thing is like taking pictures of the kid naked, so that's even weirder. It's like, I don't understand what they were going for here. There's like a thing in the bushes taking pictures of him. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not Japanese.
Yeah, it's a weird game. So what do you think about those scripts differing between the two English-speaking regions? Do you think it came down to the publishers and one just putting a little extra effort into it? Because remember, this is not a Japanese game that was localized by one team. It was really localized by two different companies in two different regions.
I think they did better in America, and I think I actually kind of like it. I think it's interesting when you have fans or people that care about their job enough to be like, you know what, this needs a little extra, so they go in the manual and they don't just make things up. Because I've seen some stuff where people just literally make up. I think we talked about this in Skies of Arcadia episode, some of the translations. were like censored, and some were taking more liberties on some of the characterizations, and I think some people like it better. Another example you brought up was Yakuza, with the whole bringing up American memes sometimes and playing them up a little bit in the translation.
Right. Yeah, and as you mentioned with those pictures, like, it's a really wacky game, so to add in really badly translated stuff just makes it really difficult to follow. I mean, I've seen some anime that's weird, but the translations make it make sense. So
right.
Let's talk about the gameplay. So, as mentioned, Bangai-O is a shoot-'em-up in which the player pilots a mechanoid, which can fly in one of 8 directions, shooting a constant stream of projectiles at enemies and obstacles. Players choose between 2 main characters, Riki and Mamie, which are swapped out interchangeably during gameplay and fly through 44 stages, which feature hordes of enemies and bosses. And like Gunstar Heroes games, the character selected dictates the weapon you use. So Riki fires homing missiles, and Mamie shoots reflecting projectiles that bounce off of walls. So I think I know the answer to this, but George, what other treasure game does Bangai-O remind you of?
Is this none? This is a unique game that has never had another game that was quite like it. I'm trying to think of their library right now and trying to think of a game that. Are you talking about the way it's trying to be this like monster like kaiju game, or?
I'm thinking of Gunstar Superheroes.
Okay, got you. Just the way that
because
the way it's all like mapped out and it looks like a Game Boy Advance game, right? Like the bits of it too.
Yeah, and also with switching up weapons on the fly and the bouncing projectile, which I believe is in Gunstar Heroes, and maybe Gunstar Heroes, but definitely Gunstar Superheroes.
Right.
So there's a little there, yeah.
This definitely reminds me of something that would be Gunstar related, like just the anime look too. Like it reminds me of Gunstar Superheroes. Remember we said that they changed the characters up. Gunstar Superheroes, when we talked about that totally different style. The style reminds me more of this than it does Gunstar Heroes, the original. So
yeah, but yeah, it definitely has a uniqueness of its own. It actually kind of reminds me of, like, if we were talking about Platinum Games, Wonderful 101, because it stays true to the Treasure style, just as Wonderful 101 stays true to the Platinum Games style, but it's all about tiny things on screen and a lot of it. You know what I mean?
right.
And that's as far as like games that I've played that I enjoy, I think Wonderful 101 comes closest, just because it's not so much about an individual character, but it's more about a screen being filled with all this crazy stuff. The game itself, it sits comfortably in the bullet hell subgenre of shooters, with the screen populated by sometimes hundreds of enemies, which can fire just as rapidly as the player. Stages are populated with destroyable buildings and obstacles and walls that can be opened with switches. Part of the challenge of the game is the fact that players' health can deplete even after being damaged, so there's no brief invulnerability. So basically, after being hit, if you're continuing to be hit, that health bar is just going to go straight down. However, destroyed enemies drop fruit. Remember that fruit contraband,
right.
Which players can collect to replenish their health meters and charge up a scatter bomb shot. The scatter bomb attack releases up to 400 shots scattered in all directions at once. And I didn't put it in the notes, but in an interview with Shmupulations, they actually talked about the fruit, and they were basically like, wouldn't it be funny if they dropped oranges as like collectibles? And it's kind of like a nod to classic arcade games. Probably they didn't mention it, but like Fantasy Zone, like coins, Streets of Rage, like chickens. So it's just dropping food. But I have to imagine the story was written backwards from the gameplay. So they were like, well, why are these guys dropping fruit? Well, they're stealing the fruit because it's contraband and you're collecting it. So there you go. The Dreamcast version of the game differs from the N64 version in that it changes rules on super moves and adds more content as well as refining assets, including graphics and music. In the Dreamcast version, bullets are stronger, and destroying objects and enemies will refill missiles, but this is dependent on how close you are to enemy projectiles. Also in the Dreamcast version, you fire up to 400 missiles at once, compared to the N64 version, which is 100. And in the N64 version, if all 100 shots hit enemies, if every single shot hits an enemy, then you open a portal to a shop, kind of like Fantasy Zone, where you can buy power-ups. However, in the Dreamcast version, they removed this, and instead the game has power-ups hidden amongst the environment that you destroy. So it encourages destroying the environment to find like hidden items. So before we get into the next question, I'm just curious, George, what other N64 ports kind of come to mind on the Dreamcast? And do you have any favorites?
Sometimes I'm like, this game, and then you're like, but actually it was a PlayStation 1 port that was ported to the N64 that was later ported onto... I want to say Hydro Thunder, but would that be an arcade port that was ported to N64 that got its own port on Dreamcast?
No, I think that's fair. I believe I think the port's actually based on the N64 one, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I picked that one. Whoop. See, I got one in. What about you?
That's a good one. Well, for me, because I remember, and I'm sure you know this too, with the official Dreamcast magazine, they would always I feel like dock points on games if they were ports from PS1 or N64. Like, oh, it's just another port. But nowadays we look at that and we're like, thank God this game that's not playable anymore on the PS1. Like, it's choppy, graphics look like shit. Like, the Dreamcast version is playable. It has better graphics. It has better sound. We just covered The Grinch, which is like kind of a crummy PS1 game, but it looks nice.
Right.
My pick though would be Rayman 2. I think that one. I believe the Dreamcast version became the definitive version to the point where when the 3DS version came out, it's a port of the Dreamcast release, which is kind of surprising.
Right.
And other ones include like Star Wars Racer.
Right.
I really like that one. You mentioned Hydro Thunder. I'm trying to remember if San Francisco Rush 2049 was an N64 port. It could be. But there's so many of them, and I actually have started to really enjoy looking back at those. Like Gauntlet Legends, that was a PS1 and I think N64 game. Tony Hawk Pro Skater, Spider-Man.
I think
Spider-Man's awesome on the Dreamcast.
I think the PlayStation 1 ports are like the Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 that came out on Dreamcast were really, really good releases of those games. Like, they looked way better on the Dreamcast than they looked on PlayStation 1. And they're rare too now. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's Soul Reaver.
Right.
There's the one with the guy shirtless.
Oh, Shadow Man.
The voodoo one. What is Shadow Man? Yeah. That came with a map inside the manual. It was so cool.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, don't sleep on N64 and PS1 ports on the Dreamcast. They're actually like, I'd say those are kind of the hidden gems because people would like scoff at them and go, oh, they're just old games being ported. They're just trying to fill up the library. But now you look back and you're like, that's the definitive version of Rayman 2. You know?
Right.
So
I agree with that one.
Yeah. So Bangai-O, as I mentioned, is unique for a Sega Talk episode because despite taking place during the Dreamcast era, the game is light on plot, light on character, huge on the number of stages, and yet features simplistic yet addictive gameplay. So what game or games does Bangai-O most remind you of, and what era do you feel this game should exist in, if not on the N64 and Dreamcast?
It reminds me of this Sega Genesis game that everyone talks about a lot. I forgot what it's called. Like, it escapes me. It's like something Wing or something, but you play as a mech pilot, and it has like this really cool hover mechanic, and you shoot things. It's called something like. It has like two names. One in Europe, it's a different name, but mech.
Is it on the Mega Drive Mini 2?
It might be. Let me see.
Oh, is it a Sega CD game? That was
Not CD, but it's a Sega Genesis Mega Drive.
Musha? No, not Musha.
Not Musha.
No. Yeah, I'd agree with you, though. It definitely feels kind of like an SNES or maybe Genesis game, or maybe even like a game that was in arcades and then ported, and was downgraded a little bit, but still cool. Interestingly, and if that game comes to your mind, let me know.
Right.
But treasure staffer Mitsura Yaida, known as Yaiman, is the brains behind Bangai-O. And if you said this game feels like an arcade game from the 80s, you'd actually be correct, because Yaida has said that he remembered playing an older shooting game that amazed him with the number of bullets that could be rendered on screen at once. And while this game has never been officially cited by Treasure, fans figured out that he's actually referring to 1983's Hover Attack, which released to Japanese computers. And before you go, oh, I hope I can, look for the original cartridge or disc or something. No, this game, and this was new to me, this game was known as a type-in game. And apparently in early 80s Japan, they had this thing called a type-in game, which was a physical book that you would buy that contained all the code printed in a book, and you would look at the book and copy what you see in the book, and you basically typed out all the programming for the game on your home computer to run it.
That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and I was reading more about type-in games. Apparently, sometimes you'd get a shitty book and they'd make mistakes,
right,
so the game wouldn't work. And so you'd kind of have to troubleshoot it yourself and get it working. And there were communities for this, people who would, be all about typing it in. And it's actually really cool because it's basically the video game version of a cookbook. And I have to imagine that a lot of people in the Genesis or Sega and Nintendo development world were probably turned on to game development thanks to this. I have a video here actually of the game in progress. I'm not sure if this is the type-in version because it was released elsewhere, and I'm sure not every single one was type out your own programming. But let's just give it a little look.
Wow, the music is not Sega quality, I'll tell you that.
Well, no, but you got to remember this is. I mean, you typed out lines of code, so
this is the
you
game
did it.
that
It's your
inspired
fault.
it. So this game's just
apparently
a little bit less anime. It is cool that they did these. Can you imagine doing Unity game? I guess they do that, right? You can buy packs where you make a simple FPS game on Unity.
Yeah, but imagine that if there's a big kind of resurgence right now of dumbed down game. What am I trying? That one with the hand crank where it's all black and white. It's almost like they take away things to make something more appealing to retro enthusiasts, and they're like, oh, this. They just announced a new console. It's one button. There's no screen, and it has one sound effect.
Right.
And people get all crazy. I honestly think that if you released a not high-end, but reasonably high-end, little video game machine, and you actually had to type out all of the code, I think that would catch on. I think that would be pretty cool.
I actually like this idea. I didn't know this was a thing back then, but it's pretty cool that you could make these games. And obviously it inspired someone that worked in the game industry when they were a kid.
Yeah. And I have to imagine, too, that there were probably communities who were like, hey, if you alter this line of code, you get unlimited missiles or unlimited health or change the mountains to blue. And that's when you start getting, into game development. Nowadays, I'd say the closest thing is Sonic the Hedgehog communities where they're they go into a game that they know full well, and then they're like, well, I'm going to change the sprite. And then they are like, well, I'm going to change the level layout. And then all of a sudden they're coding, they're developing a game even though they're just playing around with pre-existing code. So this is really cool. TypeIn Games. I'm going to have to look into that more. I wonder what the books look like, you know?
Are you going to collect them now? Are you going to look them up on the internet?
Here's my TypeIn Games. I'm Virgin Interactive.
Can you imagine doing your Barry is the biggest collector of Japanese TypeIn game magazines. And
oh my god, I'd be a Chad, right?
Right, and if I did an interview with you, I would save the question with the one question would be, have you ever done any of the TypeIn games? And you'd be, oh no, and that would end the interview like that in the end. Like I've never used.
Well, you
one.
know what? They were actually in Western areas too. I see a Commodore 64 games book released in 1983 in the UK. It's 30 simple games that you can type in the programming for. So everything from Quack to Turkey to Fruit Machine, Cats and Dogs, Simon. So very simple games. But, you can buy it for like £4.
What is that, like $150 in American?
No, I think it's like $4, right?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, they're like $20 now. Yeah.
Oh. I thought it was going to be like...
That's really cool. Yeah. Commodore 64 Adventures. And okay. Well, that's a whole thing I never knew about. That's very cool. Let's see. Where was I? Sorry. Bear with me.
Bear with you. I was going to say...
Bear with me. All right, here we go. Yaida. So Yaida began work on thinking up challenges that the team might encounter in programming such a game, including detecting when bullets collide with other objects and other issues they might come across along the way. So he worked on a prototype. Later, after presenting the prototype to the president of Treasure, Masato Megawa, he was given permission to add staff to his project and work towards producing a full game. Yaida served as the main programmer and general manager and oversaw a team of about 10 people. The game was developed with a focus on creating addictive and fast gameplay, with less focus on graphics and possibly story, and opted for a large and fast 2D effects and anime artwork to preserve the Treasure style. One artist on the game, Koichi Kimura, had worked on Guardian Heroes and brought his skills and recognizable art style to the table. And despite more powerful development hardware being available to the team, Yaida and his staff wanted to push the limits of 2D graphics. The story, meanwhile, is said to be based on Japanese Yakuza revenge stories. So, the name Bangai-O was actually low on a list of possible titles that the team threw out there. And as you remember, the Japanese name Bangai-O is spelled Bangaioh, so it's phonetic there. Whereas the English version made O its own little separate thing. And he told this story in an interview that he announced to the team, like kind of enthusiastically, that he decided to go with Bangai-O because it stuck in his head, and they all just kind of went silent and were just like, "Oh, cool." so they all hated the name. What are your thoughts on the name? I know at the top of the show you actually said you liked the additional words. What was it?
It was a little
explosive, invincible Bangai-O.
It was a little thing called sarcasm. I'm a little. I'm a professional at it. I got my master's on it. Minored at being an asshole. But I think maybe I would have tied it into another. I mean, personally, as a marketing person, I would have just tied it into another brand that was more popular. I think if you talk to anyone that used to play video games back then, like hardcore gamers, and you say Bangai-O today, they probably won't know what the franchise is. But there's a bigger chance if you said Gunstar Heroes, they would know what that is.
Right. Good point.
So, like, calling it something like Gunstar Heroes, Gaiden, Mech Wars, or Mech, whatever, just whatever with mechs in it, or kaijus, they could have probably gotten some fans in it. But most likely, I'm assuming copyright reasons is why it's a new IP. But
Yeah.
Name it something that has to do with big robots. Bangai-O doesn't. It's kind of like, I don't know. What does that remind you of when you think of it?
Like you banged a guy.
Mine, I was thinking like
Oh.
Bandai, like toys. I think of toys because Bandai, Bangai-O,
Oh.
kind of the same names. I don't know.
I don't know. I'm thinking like on The Sopranos when they're like, hey, whoa, bang guy? Oh.
Oh,
You know,
Bangai-O. Oh, I don't play that.
Wait, that guy? He bang guy? Oh.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
But yeah, for me, if I could retitle the game, I'd probably throw in like Giant Robot, whatever.
Right.
I understand though why they were probably just keen to release the game and not like shop around IP and like tie it to something, because then they'd probably have to change the game to suit the license holder. They'd go, oh, we don't want missiles, we want hearts and we want kisses or something. Interestingly, we've had on the Swing and Report show, I think 2 or 3 times, Chris Tang, who worked at Atari, Tengen, and Capcom. And he had an interesting career, but one of the things he would do is like suggest titles for games. So he actually named the game Techromancer, which I received Bangai-O in a eBay bundle with. And I asked him about that. I was like, did you have anything really to do with the game outside of that? And he's like, no, I just suggested the title and they liked it. So I think get Chris Tang on the phone and he could probably give you a good name for this game. Techromancer it's kind of pulpy. It says tech, like, what are you gonna like kiss a robot? You know?
I mean, he has renamed his game 3 times, so maybe
That's true.
Maybe I don't know. He might rename this game more than that. I'm just joking.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point. And I should shout out, and I already did, but thanks to Shmupulations for their work in translating Japanese interviews. I actually got a lot of that information. But if we click on over to the article itself, there are some images they have on there from the original interview that I thought were kind of funny. So scrolling down, you can see artwork done of Yaiman, as he calls himself, the creator of Bangai-O.
Whoa!
And he's like a fish man. You see that?
Right. It kind of looks like he was wearing a dress at first. I thought it was a female character. I was like, oh, he's a female? But then I look at
Bangai? Oh! Yeah, right.
Oh, I see. So they drew... Well, this one's crazy. The one with the eyes.
Oh, yeah. That is weird. Oh, and you know what? There is a note here, too. Remember that original name I said? Muteki Robo 893?
Right.
So... in Japanese, 893 kind of sounds like Yakuza.
Oh.
So that's why it's Muteki Robo Yakuza.
What do you think about
That's
the character
interesting.
portraits? I actually really like the art. I dig the color usage, the weird designs. Like there's like, is that like the peacock, but it's a guy in a suit that it's like a parrot, right? And then you have this like guy with a big old cigar. I don't even know.
Right.
Frankenstein with a pompadour. I don't know what that is.
It actually reminds me of Ultimate Muscle. You know, those little like flesh tone color wrestlers that just look like random.
Right.
And as you can see here, this is like a very long interview, but so much of it is them being asked like, why'd you do this? And then he'll be like,
why not?
I just thought it was funny. Or he'd say like, why did you do this? And he goes, I just like Kamen Rider. You know,
yeah.
like it's just, they just kind of did stuff that they thought looked funny or cool. And there's not a lot of reasoning behind it. They were like, oh, what about the story? And they were like, oh, they're like space Yakuza, you know, like.
Right. I like it.
They even, at one point, they talk about like, oh, we didn't mention this in the story, but there's like other planets and there's a woman planet and everything's pink. You know, so they're not taking this seriously at all. Have you ever seen the anime Dead Leaves?
No, I haven't.
It's about a space prison, and all the inmates are like completely different. Like there's one who's called Drill Dick, and his dick's a giant drill.
That's beautiful.
And then there's a guy with a TV head, and then there's like a sexy girl, and so that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here. It's just like an insane mix of weird character designs for the sake of having an insane mix of character designs. It's like Pokemon, basically.
Right.
Yeah, and even it was said too that like as far as like meetings, sometimes they wouldn't have everyone in the same meeting. So they're like, oh, we're going to talk about story and characters, and the game designers were like, have fun, we don't care. And like even the all the dialogue was actually done like by people who usually wouldn't be handling the dialogue, I believe. So like the artist would be throwing in some dialogue, and the Yaiman, you know, who's overseeing the gameplay would just be like, oh, he's doing whatever, I don't care. So it was a very loose sort of, it wasn't a tight ship, but I think it actually works to their favor because it creates this kind of like wacky game where story doesn't really matter, and it's just kind of a fun little thing. As long as they stuck to that, you know, core boy and girl in a giant mech fighting Yakuza who are stealing fruit, they were happy.
Isn't that kind of what like Metal Slug is, right? You're in a war zone, but you're eating fruit and getting fat. So
pretty much, yeah. And, you know, other games, you'll sometimes find this, like Jet Set Radio. If you look at developer interviews, you think they're going to get really deep, and sometimes they're just like, oh, we thought it was funny.
Right.
Like, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And they're like, it was silly.
And I think that, like, people take gaming and old gaming way too deep. Like, they're like, oh, they did this because they're I'm like, they're racist or they hate women. It's like, no, they just didn't think it through. Like, half the stuff they were just like in the moment, basically. Like, oh yeah, we're making this game. Cool, we're gonna make this character this. Why? Because it's funny. We're gonna make a planet full of women that's pink. Why? Because it's funny. That's why. There's no other reason.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no malicious reason. It's just funny.
No. And I think what I like about this game is it's almost like a sketchbook come to life, like a shoot 'em up in a sketchbook, because none of the ideas were really like, they're all kind of half-baked, first draft. You know, they didn't really sit down and try to map out a universe. You called it a new IP. I don't even think they were looking at it like that. They're just like, it's just a crazy, weird game based on this concept. Now, as far as release, as I mentioned, the game released September 99 to the N64, 10,000 cartridges. Dreamcast version followed up in December 99. By February 2000, publishers were actually looking at the possibility of localizing the game for the Dreamcast. And at E3 2000, IGN reported that the game was in the works for being localized, and it was being renamed Bangai-O from the original Japanese title. In December of that year, Conspiracy Entertainment announced that they would be localizing Bangai-O, as well as another Japanese game called Record of Lotus War, which, as I mentioned, was actually in the bundle with this game. I don't think we've done that game, but I'd really like to do it we haven't.
It's based on an anime, so we would probably have to like at least understand what the anime is about, right?
Yeah, you know, and we've done so many of these that maybe we did do it. I don't know. No, we didn't.
We didn't do this.
But no, that would be a fun one. It's kind of like a dungeon crawler, right?
Right.
But yeah, so anyway, that it was kind of like their little dipping their toes into the water to become kind of like a Japanese game localizer, which is kind of cool. The game was originally slated for February 27, 2001, but was eventually moved back forward a month to March 21st. When the game released, it had positive reviews for both the Dreamcast and N64. Often the treasure style of the game was cited and praised. IGN stated that the game was an addictive and original hodgepodge of genres and game mechanics that defy easy explanation. Game Fan said that Bangai-O played like an SNES game with less slowdown, higher resolution, and more color. Reviewers who had played both console versions preferred the Dreamcast one, citing updated graphics, new CD quality soundtrack, and more streamlined gameplay. However, reviewers were more critical of the game's graphics, likely because the Dreamcast was expected to be a 3D powerhouse, and here they were being presented with a retro-style 2D game. Dreamcast Magazine UK, which I always feel like when we bring it up, it's never in a positive light.
I was going to say. I feel bad for the
they
people
were
in the UK.
I do too, because we constantly talk about the American one, ODCM, and how great it was, and then Dreamcast Magazine UK comes out with a big loud fart,
right?
And
big
they said they called the game unimaginative. Oh, really? Did we play the game game? Like, what the?
Are we going to pretend that we all haven't seen British food and understand what imaginative is? Like, come on. Like,
I know the array of colors on your plate, from brown to white to yellow.
Okay, we can't make fun of British people. Sorry, guys.
Whatever.
They have soccer.
They know what they did.
They have soccer.
I just watched a video. I watched a video today of a British guard kicking a child. Shame on you.
Glad our police officers and other people in authority would never do anything like that.
Well, yeah, that's true. So, and I thought this was kind of wild. So if this doesn't put the time that the game released in perspective, Bangai-O was nominated for the Electric Playground's 2001 Blister Award for Best Console Shooter Game, but it lost to Halo Combat Evolved.
Wow.
So,
I've never heard of that game. What is it about? Halo?
And
it's a God game?
Well, and maybe I'm thinking too much about this, but do you see this as kind of a turning point in gaming? Not just this win of Halo over Bangai-O, but just the mere fact that these two games could exist on store shelves together.
I think it was literally like seeing like the past and future, like Japanese gaming. It almost feels like a metaphor, right? Where like
right.
American games were literally going first person / third person, and we're changing all of gaming starting right now. Like,
right.
First person shooters still dominate. Fortnite is a first person shooter. You know what I mean? Apex Legends that people are playing, all the kids, is a first person shooter.
Right.
So this is the start of that domination, and then seeing the old Japanese using old technology trying to go against at the time, Halo Combat Evolved was the most cutting-edge game on consoles.
Absolutely. And I mean, that isn't to say that smaller games getting disc releases didn't continue for several years after this and, even to today. But just the mere fact that, like, a game where the development team intentionally avoided 3D graphics to try to push 2D, going up against possibly one of the biggest 3D first-person shooter games of all time that basically revitalized a genre, created a franchise that basically defined and some would say like saved the Xbox. And honestly, like Bangai-O feels like an Xbox Live Arcade title by comparison. It's like, why is this getting a full retail disc release when one console generation later, Bangai-O HD literally released as an Xbox Live Arcade title alongside the likes of Halo 2, Halo 3, So it's like, it's just, I don't think the development team ever felt like I bet they didn't even really know about this award. I don't think they cared.
Right.
But just the fact that you would look at, like if this were the Oscars, you'd see Bangai-O, Halo, it's kind of like,
right. And
holy crap.
What do you think about like the idea that, I don't know, people saw these games, right? Like the Xbox was brand new. The Dreamcast was already out for a few years. People were saying that it was dying. And then all of a sudden, they're like showing you these games that are Halo, and you're like, oh my god, that's cutting edge 3D graphics with land, and you can do all this crazy stuff you can never do in any other game. And then they're like, oh yeah, this game on Dreamcast, and it's a Sega Genesis game, and it's all pew 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 with little missiles.
I know, right?
So to me, it's like, I don't know, it would have been weird because, I mean, my friends didn't talk about it that much, like the console war stuff, but they did bring it up sometimes where they'd be like, oh, this game looks great on PlayStation 2. What does Dreamcast have that's like this, right? It would have been weird trying to explain to people like, no, the Dreamcast has other first-person games. We have Quake 3, we have Unreal Tournament, and they're like, what about that Bangai-O? I saw it on the awards show. It looks like a Genesis game, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, thankfully, the Dreamcast was kind of on the outs at this point, so it's not like they were being hurt by appearing at an awards show, but it is just kind of fascinating that those two sat side by side. It's kind of like when you look in the past and you're like, holy crap, like Charlie Chaplin was making a movie when, Jackie Chan, like not that happened, but like there's just sometimes these situations where you're like, oh, this guy who was born in like the 1800s actually starred in a movie with this guy who's still alive today.
Right, right.
It's interesting. There is technically a collector's edition of the game that was given out as part of a contest in Japan, and only 5 copies were ever made, making it extremely rare. But before you get too excited, I know this edition is known as the prize edition, and outside of the pack-in items, it's the exact same game. It comes with a sticker, 2 calling cards signed by the game's artist, as well as a poster. And it actually was a featured blog post about a little over 10 years ago on price charting. And they talk about how it was up for sale on eBay at one point with no bids.
Really? How much did you want?
I don't know if... the game sold for $811.
Oh, that was worth it. I mean, worth it in the fact that you could tell people you have this one of 5, but kind of dumb in the end because it is literally like every single version. So outside of vanity's sake for the stickers,
it looks like it came with a copy of Dreamcast magazine, the Japanese one,
right?
The 2 calling cards, the poster, and I don't know where the sticker is, but it's there somewhere. So it's. I mean, to call it its own edition is kind of a stretch. That's like saying, I don't know, that like you included a copy of Sonic Frontiers in like a box with a T-shirt.
Right.
Like that doesn't make the game any different. But still kind of interesting because only 5 of these exist, so you're not going to see that. I don't think you'll see it again.
It's funny seeing the comments here. People were like trying to guess how much it would go for, and they're like $4,000. I'm sure. $811.
Right. So there's the prize edition of the game. BangaiO received 2 sequels, the first being BangaiO Spirits in 2008 for the Nintendo DS, and the second being BangaiO HD Missile Fury in 2011, released to Xbox 360's XBLA. And before you, like I did, rush to the store to try to download it,
not there. It's
sadly now delisted. And it was delisted a little over a year ago, I think during the pandemic. No announcement. It just disappeared, which really sucks because I would have downloaded it in a heartbeat had I known.
I wonder who who owns the IP. Treasure, maybe?
Why would it get delisted, though? That's what I don't understand. There's nothing... It is Treasure, so why would it... It's a Treasure game.
I'm hoping that they do a port, because I noticed that they did Radiant Silvergun and they did Ikagura recently, and they've been kind of like showing off that. I hope that maybe we'll get like a Bangai-O kind of like retro collection would be nice.
That would be cool. Yeah. The sequels feature the same gameplay but bring in more weapons and gameplay elements. Both sequels also feature level editors, which is pretty cool, and the XBLA version features multiplayer modes. Were you aware of these sequels?
I was aware of Spirits on the DS because I remember seeing it in the stores when it came out. I thought, again, the same way. It kind of reminds me of the covers for these games. It reminded me of a cheap Japanese kids show, and I think that's what it was going for. Like a Saturday morning cartoon TV show. So, and I remember seeing the cover, and I always thought it was weird that they didn't use any of the anime characters on the cover for the US, making it, I think, less appealing. I think the anime characters kind of give it a little more vibe. So
Yeah, I knew of the DS one, but I never really got into it. I kind of want to buy it now. I mean, I could get one of those little... I don't know, like if there's a DS EverDrive or something.
Right, they're called something else, but there is obviously.
Yeah. But the game itself is actually not that expensive. You can get it for $60 complete, which is close to retail. Cartridge only is about $35, so it's not that bad.
No.
And it's worth noting as we record this that the 3DS eShop is shutting down next week. So, yeah. R.I.P. It's so silly though, because here we are talking about the 3DS eShop shutting down, and yet elements of the Xbox 360 marketplace are still there. Like,
do you think?
What's with?
And this is a thing too. Like, Nintendo wants you to invest in their ecosystem, but they're always doing this. Like, you should be like working hard on connecting all these ecosystems together. Like, these games,
Right.
If you buy a Super Nintendo game on the Switch with your money, it should be the 3DS, and it should just be all unlocked in all of your accounts. Like, I don't understand this whole like
Right.
separation.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
I know, and then I'm learning that there are like DSi games on the 3DS, so I gotta like check those out too. I'm done though. I told myself that I was gonna buy all the Phoenix Wright stuff, and I did that, and I'm done. Because I did want those games at least.
Have you picked up any of the Switch ports? I know they did physical collections on a physical disc of the maybe the one with the new kid, the one after him.
Apollo,
yeah.
Justice.
I think so.
Yeah. Apollo Creed.
Apollo Creed,
Apollo
right.
Justice. Yeah. But yeah, it's a shame because we're here talking about a DS Bangai-O game that never had a digital release, and then we're talking about a digital Bangai-O game that is delisted, and then the original game is $175. So it is of the three, I would say Bangai-O Spirits is the most affordable. It's just a shame the HD one's just like not available anymore, and I stupidly never bought it because I didn't really think much about it.
Pirate it.
Yeah, I think I'll have to figure that out. Final thoughts on Bangai-O. George, you go first.
So, I think I need to play this game, so I don't have too many thoughts of this, but I do remember the game I was thinking about, and now that I look at the game, it doesn't remind me outside that it's a mech game, but it's called Ranger X, and it's like the one, so you're in a mech on a ship, and then you could like separate yourself from the ship. It's usually a side-scroller.
Yes.
It's pretty interesting. I think the game has this really cool aesthetic. Obviously, the characters on this other game are a little bit bigger but most of the gameplay I've seen from Ranger X, you're not really flying around, even though you could technically fly around in this game, right? But yeah.
Yeah. But it definitely kind of like, if you look at the screenshots, there is like a similarity there for sure. That's pretty cool. I think that's on the Mini, right?
I'm not sure if it's on the Mini. I haven't played too much of the Mini. I haven't had that much free time to play it, but I'm not sure. It could be. I'm almost 100%. I think you might be right about this because it has a playing game, but I'm not sure if it's this one.
Maybe it's on the Mega Drive Mini, but not the Genesis Mini. But if you change the region, you get Region X.
I like that they did that.
Or Ranger X.
Right. I like that they did that.
Anyway.
But that you could just get the other ones.
Yeah, I know. That's a sweet feature of it. For me, final thoughts, it's a fun but kind of I wouldn't call it a footnote, but it's definitely a tiny game in the Treasure catalog. But it's fun. I wish there were more tiny games like this from them, where it's just like a fun idea that a small team works on. Seems like the game was a success. It got positive reviews. There was nothing in terms of sales, but I'm presuming it sold well. I mean, you only make 10,000 N64 cartridges, and I'm certain those sold out.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a franchise I think that deserves to come back. I would love to see the original game ported. I'd love to see Missile Fury, the HD version, brought back. It's just a shame that it's delisted with no like fanfare. I remember when there was another Treasure thing. Was it Gunstar Heroes HD that was delisted? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's still around.
Guardian Heroes, maybe.
Guardian Heroes, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And
But
right.
and Radiant Silvergun, but it's unfortunate that it hasn't seen like re-releases like those have. I'd love to see a Switch port, maybe of all of them, like a Bangai-O collection where it has the original with both translations. It has the DS version. It has the HD version. Would be cool.
This is something that Treasure actually talked about. Like when Ikagura came out, they said they wanted to do more ports, and then they just stopped. Like so, I never know with them because they always announce all these plans and rumors, and then nothing comes from it. Remember when? Like I remember when Radiant Silvergun came out on the Xbox Live Arcade. It was like rumored that they were working with Microsoft on making a third entry to their shoot 'em up game. So it's like Radiant Silvergun, Ikagura, and then whatever the third one will be. But never happened.
Yeah.
Sad.
Sad indeed. But you know what's not sad are the Patreon memories that we have. So just like Bangai-O, we have a tiny selection here. We have Nicholas Schaefer sharing his thoughts. He says, well, my only real memory of this game is wanting it. This was constantly the game that I would carry around the store, but when I made the final call, I would always put it back. It looked really cool, but because I knew nothing about it, I was always afraid to spend my money on it versus something I would like. In hindsight, I wish I picked it up. Yeah, $175. You should have picked it up.
I agree. Me and him both.
Don't, you know, and I've learned my lesson nowadays. When I see a game that I'm like, this looks niche, I get it. And I tell you, Rhythm Thief and Hatsune Miku for 3DS, I picked up both of those, and I believe those are both fairly expensive games now. So don't sleep on it. If you think it looks cool, get it. You never know. George, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Next time on Sega Talk, we will be talking about a Sega video game. I think you guys should really tune in for the next one because it's going to be a very special game, hand-selected by...
You don't know what it is?
No, I don't know what it is. What is it?
Because it's not even a game. I think you're going to be talking about the 32X hardware.
Ooh, all right. We'll be talking about outdated, trashy hardware called the 32X. I'll tell you more about its 5 titles that have released North America, its overinflated price, and its lack of marketing. Next time.
Ouch.
On Sega Talk. Bye.
Bye.
Sorry about leaving it in such a negative.
No, you were like, oh, it's a game.